DiMasi. Elaine is a physicist who, until this past summer, worked over 20 years at Brookhaven National Laboratory, juggling research, engineering, and outreach. She earned her doctorate from the University of Michigan and her undergraduate degree from Penn State. Elaine was born in Pittsburgh and raised by an electrical engineer and a bacteriologist. So it's no wonder that she and her brother pursued scientific paths. Elaine's scientific proclivity has an environmental bent, which I'm excited to talk to you about in the context of your congressional bid with this looming threat or reality of global warming. I did a lot of homework for tonight's interview. So sit back, enjoy, and please welcome Elaine DiMasi. So thank you for coming. One of the things that has been so hard for me over the course of the past year is living in this world of non-truths. As a scientist, I don't know how you're upright. So how hard has it been for you to navigate the voter outreach part of your campaign, let alone your everyday interactions with people when so many of our neighbors are operating without the same baseline of facts?
I'm really glad you asked the question in that way. How has it been to be the scientist in a world where a large number of people seem to be fighting for a post-truth instead, and how has that affected the voter outreach? In a way, it gave me a soapbox to stand on before I even left my job, because honestly, we have seen the run-up to this over the past 30 years, past 10 years, past 20 years, with the kind of the Rush Limbaugh talk radio and the Fox News and the Tea Party in Washington since 10 years ago. We've been seeing the run-up to this. We're just now at this point where now the false truth, the anti-truth is able to publish itself in this way. So for some of the people I talk to, it's the most welcoming thing ever. Like, a scientist is going to symbolize a return to facts and evidence-based policy, and people could just get behind that because that's a torch to carry. For other people who have said, how are you going to promote yourself as somebody factual in this crazy climate? And my answer is, I'm going to stand up and shout even louder. I can't be telling another generation that, well, you know what, we gave up. Truth just collapsed like a bad currency, and we said, well, I got a 401k. You know, I have to look at who's going to stand up and say that the world still has problems, we still have to tell the truth about them. You know, we cannot lie to people. For the last 10 years of my Brookhaven lab email, a little signature on my email had a quote that said, if you tell a lie, you can avoid a scrape, but it's better to take the scrape and avoid the lie. And when I looked at the election last year, even though I had been watching what happens as the Tea Party, for example, gave us a Congress that could shut the government down in 2013 or delay continuing resolutions, I saw immediately the effect that had on government agencies. But I could look at that landscape and say, all right, there's going to be resources now to help scientists run for office. And I could have kept my job that I had to resign last summer, but what I saw was that I would keep my job, but somebody younger was not going to be able to have a career like mine, and I was going to be watching the bottom fall out of it. That wasn't acceptable to me.
So in terms of the truth, when you're talking to people and you're out in the way that you are today, and somebody comes at you with something and it's just not true, how do you get through to them in a way that they can hear you?
We have to find out what they do know and why they may be coming at me with something that's untrue. And to be, I think, a little deferential to their feeling while you're resolute on the facts. For example, I was at an event out here on the East End. It was one of the community-sourced agriculture events at one of the farms. And I was meeting people and telling a little bit about my plans for office. I'm very much running on a platform of the clean energy economy, clean energy jobs that we can have on Long Island, and the offshore wind project that the state is developing is a large part of that. So I met somebody who said, well, I heard that those turbines structures are made of steel, and my neighbor's steel boat takes an enormous amount of upkeep because it rusts. So it can't be true that it's reasonable to put steel structures in the ocean. And I think you start by helping people know that there's information that they missed. I said, this technology's been in Norway for 20, 30 years. It's not new in terms of the world to understand how to build a structure in the ocean. But if you would like me to go back and bring more information about the exact alloys that they have on the surfaces of these turbines, that's something I'm equipped to do. I can translate that information into information that makes sense to a person on the street. So that conversation, I don't know really how he felt about the wind turbines. I don't know if he was really worried about the steel or if he really just felt encroached upon. I don't know whether he felt like it was going to be an eyesore, that fishing jobs would disappear. I never finished getting to know that person. But at the very least, he had to understand, he accepted me saying, this technology has been in oceans for 2 decades. Corrosion of the structures is not the issue. Perhaps something else is. We have to converse more to find out.
I asked because we're taking a training with the Long Island Progressive Coalition, and a canvassing training, and we're taught that if we knock on a door and we find out rather quickly that somebody is a Trump supporter, to just back away slowly. Don't engage. But you're in a position where you have to represent this district, and so it's an interesting. It's interesting to me to see how you're going to go about talking to people when there's a different baseline of fact. So that's an interesting story. Thank you.
If I may, it's important to understand that I want to represent the whole district. After the election last fall, as I was deciding what my life as a scientist might look like, I asked myself how I would feel if my job were to represent everybody, no matter how they voted. I didn't get angrier when I thought about that. I calmed down. So that really told me a path. I worked side by side with technicians at the lab and other people who have grown up in the redder parts of Brookhaven town, lived here all their lives, and have voted for Republicans, either far right or centrist Republicans, all their lives. A lot of them voted for Trump. They decided that the danger to the laboratory was an exaggeration. It's not my job to argue with them at work. I depend on that technician at work to help me build what I'm building, and he depends on me to guide the project. We have those relationships. I really have relationships in this district, and this is an expansion of that.
So, sort of related, there's, I think, 2 trains of thought broadly when it comes to Democrats and elections. There's a group who wants a sensible, middle-of-the-road candidate, middle-of-the-road Democrat, who's going to kill off moderate Republicans. And then there's another group who wants a real liberal left-wing candidate who's super progressive and is going to energize the base. And I wonder what kind of Democrat you think will win elections in 2018.
I think I'm the kind of Democrat that will win this election here. And the reason is I don't see why I won't appeal to any of those voters that you described. And perhaps because I'm not a career politician who's had a lot of training in worrying about exactly what this poll or that consultant says to do, I know what people really respond to. It's genuineness. I genuinely believe that the future is a bright place if we just solve the problems. The scientists I work with do something that seems impossible all the time. Sometimes it's my own colleagues or even competitors. I say, you'll never get to that number, but 5 years later they do, they figure it out. So when I talk about a clean energy economy, because I know that real jobs will allow us to produce the energy here, to install it, to develop tooling, to do the research for it, that's not a stump speech that changes when I'm talking to progressives or millennials versus moderate Republicans who want to see an economy here. I don't say anything in front of the crowd that has to change for the general election for the most part.
So I guess also related, you're a political newcomer. I want to know more about your campaign. Tell us how you formed your team, who they are, and what influenced the advocacy group 314, 314?
Yes.
Action had in the process in crafting your platform.
Thanks very much for that question. In terms of becoming a candidate, like everything else in my career, I don't really jump blindly into anything. I study it first. I've kind of had 30 years of training on how to study. After Trump's election, there was a science march. There was also a climate march. And I had also seen in the news things that different organizations were doing. 314 Action is a political action committee. The founder is a chemist from Pennsylvania, Shaughnessy Naughton. She ran for Congress in Democratic primaries in Pennsylvania in, I think, 2014 and 2016. After that, she decided to form a group to help educate other candidates so that they would know what she had to learn the hard way. That group existed prior to the 2016 election, but they became visible then, and I found out about them. And at first when I explored, it was kind of on behalf of other candidates. I went to training in Washington with 314 in March and April, took courses in how to fundraise, how to speak publicly, how to keep volunteers engaged, all the kind of things a campaigner needs to know. Got introduced to consultants. I sat down with PAC directors at the Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, Emily's List. Subsequently, I've talked to Planned Parenthood and the Human Rights Campaign. So that was all run up that I did through last spring. Then in the summer, I took a clipboard and I kind of went to healthcare rallies and things like that. And I said, there are scientists running for office. I'm a liaison to them. Are you interested in supporting them? And when the clipboard started to fill up with names, and I realized that I enjoyed engaging with those people, then again, I felt like I had knowledge then and power. There's still always a lot to learn when you switch careers. All that creates is inefficiency. I'm gonna have to work a few extra hours in the day to catch up to some of what people do, but I'm not running to be just like the politicians. I'm running to be myself. I'm running to be someone who will go to Congress with a problem-solving perspective that says, all right, I've been trained to remove my own personal biases as much as possible. I haven't been trained as an attorney to attack a predetermined half of the problem. So it's easy to stay true to that.
And did they help you craft your platform and form your issues? And who specifically is working on your campaign? Do you have, are they also political newcomers? How did you recruit your team?
That's a good question too. I developed the platform partly by listening to people throughout the summer and then partly by speaking to consultants. So in August, I engaged a team with political connections here who runs a lot of different kind of campaigns. And the team at that time was several part-time people to do campaign management, financial compliance, financial direction, and a digital media strategy. And then I formed the committee out of some people who I knew would help me as treasurer and records custodian, people who were close to me. So then, this is something I mentioned that was asked directly at Three Village Democratic Club, so I'm going to mention it here too. I have dissolved that particular group of consultants and remade my consulting team between November and now. So I'll be working with slightly different numbers of people, but it's a good combination of volunteers for the practical, everyday things. We have volunteer groups. That was 25 people in November when I first scheduled the first meeting. We doubled it to 50 in December, and as of last week, it was over 80. So I'm hoping we can double our volunteer group again to 100 in January.
That's great, congratulations.
Thanks.
You mentioned fundraising. How are you going about raising money, especially when you know that if you win the primary, you're going to be up against the Mercers?
This is a $4 million race. That's what all the PAC people will say. They will say, raise $400,000 yourself, and then people like me will talk to you. That's kind of what they say. 4 million is my number. If you divide that by 200,000 voters that I want to reach, that's $20 per voter. Suddenly it doesn't seem so crazy, because how do you reach all those people? You need TV commercials in this market. I do it the same way everyone else does. I have house parties, I make calls, I have special friends if I can make them. I have received 2 endorsements for the campaign this week, so that's very exciting. The American Women's Party and a group called Demand Universal Healthcare both endorsed the DiMasi for Congress campaign. And each of those groups brings a reach of 10,000 more people, and that's a coalition as well. So you put a quality candidate and quality materials, and we grow. To do my seed money, I went to the heart of my world. I went to the other scientists. I took a month of leave off work, and I called everyone I knew. If I ran out of that list, I opened up a faculty page at some university, looked through it, said, yeah, I remember them. Called them up and asked them for $250. That's the same thing that all the candidates know how to do. You just call them up, and when you're calling strangers, they won't answer the phone the first 4 times, but the 5th time they'll pick up, and the 6th time they'll write you a check. That's really the reality. It's not more of a slog than grad school.
Did they put a number on winning the primary, I wonder?
There's no they. You know, I know what budget I need to make the materials I need to get on the ballot and then to do the primary. It's reasonable to use that same $20 per voter number. And if you don't have the dollars, you need to inspire your volunteers and outwork everybody else.
Yeah. So speaking of primaries, and facts for that matter, it's a fact that no Democrat in this district has ever won a general election after a Democratic primary. What do you make of that fact as a scientist? And regardless of who wins the 2018 primary, what, in your opinion, does that candidate need to do to break that pattern to win the general?
To the first point, I don't make much of that fact. Is that a meaningful statistic? I mean, is it meaningful to say that that there's something special about this district, that we're allergic to primaries and that we all fall apart? Is there really a lot of data on that? We've been looking at the past 12 years of Tim Bishop, where of course we didn't have a Democratic primary. Tim told me that the party early on when he was running approached candidates and asked them to sign a non-primary compact. I can't imagine the county being able to do that in this heated environment, kind of in the wake of people being so easily divided from each other by social media forces, and anyone trying to cause chaos is finding it very easy to divide people right now. That's a big problem. So if we are ourselves and we're not just going to be blown around by those forces, then we'll know what to do. We will get behind our candidate fearlessly for this primary. I think progressives are fearless, and I think fearlessness looks good on us. Then we dust ourselves off after the primary and rock the vote.
Do you think that we're able to have a clean primary without any dirt slinging? Or do you even think that that's a smart approach? Do you think we should sling some dirt?
You're going to see every candidate come at this with a different philosophy. It's our job as a campaigner for the people who support us to show why we're the one for the job.
And so what's your approach? Is opposition strategy part of your game?
It is always important to know where your opposition is weaker than yourself or could be seen as stronger than yourself, and to work on what those talking points or those areas need to be addressed.
You might be sick of this question, but if you are not victorious in June, will you support whoever is? And to what extent? I think that that's an important question. I mean, it's one thing to just say you'll get behind whoever the voters pick in the primary. But I think what a lot of us are hoping for is that everybody has different groups that they can galvanize, and to really have everybody that's in the primary throw their support behind whoever wins so that we can get a Democrat in this district.
I'm sure that everyone already supporting my campaign will absolutely throw themselves behind another candidate, because if getting Zeldin out of office isn't their first priority, it's at least their second or third. The only caveat I will say on exactly what I will be doing is that I had to resign my job in order to become a candidate. I'm not married, I live alone. I'm the candidate in the race who doesn't have a salary or a roof over my head, except insofar as I spend from my savings account while I'm a campaigner. That means that after I end my campaigning, if it does not lead to my next job, I need to find another job. So that puts me in a position where you'll find me as an elected member of Congress too. I won't make promises that I can't keep.
Okay, so let's discuss the issues. At the forum that was organized by the Southampton Progressive Caucus, you had a wonderful moment of putting everything that everybody was saying into perspective by looking at it through the lens of climate change. And that was really refreshing. I think you actually got applause for that, which was cool. I mean, it's one of, if not the biggest threat to our national security. We don't need to know where you stand on clean energy, but what we need to know is how. How in the context of what, and adoption and implementation. I'm really excited to get some real Googleable things from you, like real straightforward facts about how we're going to do this.
Right. So the marketing question for fossil fuels and carbon is, do we charge people money for creating carbon, or do we incentivize them for not using it? And the jury is out, which to me means that we try both so that we have more data. We find sectors of the economy to do both of these things. We compartmentalize it if we can. You know, we're always, in policy, you're always to some extent running an experiment over whether this will work. The most important thing is your metrics. So we have to know what metrics we want to know whether we're succeeding. There has to be demonstrably less fossil fuel put into burners and burned, or we're not succeeding. So rather than letting people get stuck between arguing with each other which of these tactics to use, what I will look for is a way to put some of these tactics here and put others here in ways that make sense so that everybody can report back and say what we're doing.
Could you maybe give us a little bit more of an idea of what that would look like, specifically here in District 1? What would you do specifically? How would you test it?
Specifically in District 1, I think we should go full-on force with the New York State plan for the clean energy electricity. There's a goal of 50% electricity from renewables. How far could that be pushed beyond 50% is a question I'm also being asked, whether electricity can be 100% from renewables by 2050, numbers like that. That's a really good question. So we have to have all of Long Island, not just progressives, embrace a yes in my backyard attitude, and help them do that. And to bring incentives here, I think you should ask all the candidates how they're going to be the one who succeeds in this difficult Congress to bring incentives. The best thing is to have a bill that works for the district but is also good for the nation. So in this case, to have a plan above the local plan is to say, what does the whole nation need to do? The whole nation has an energy portfolio, and the whole nation has obsolete or outdated generations of energy. There may be an old nuclear plant in one state, there may be an old coal mine in another state.
Right.
So if it's kind of a concept of convection. If I think like a scientist, I was thinking, how do I get money here? You have to move something else out of the way. If federal money relieves us of old energy infrastructure, then for conservatives, you're giving something that is within their realm of approval. Oh, good, the federal government's not telling me what to do. They're just helping me get rid of this reactor that I inherited that I don't want. And then the state and local money can build what they need. And then you have a natural process of more buy-in locally so that we will see what people want to build here. I think there is a lot of motivation for the wind and the solar. I would like to see more of engineering of the economics of it too, community solar programs so that people are invested in it without necessarily okay, it's just the roof on my house. And it's going to be important to bring smart grid technology to the forefront on Long Island where we have distributed energy sources. And the Brookhaven National Lab and Stony Brook University and the Technology Incubator are already key players in that who are doing smart grid research and energy storage research into battery materials. We need to enhance that so that we have a way to pass energy around and get to those numbers.
It's so frustrating. It feels like it's all here. We're just waiting for somebody to do something.
When you look at the numbers of the radiant energy coming from the sun, it looks like the biggest no-brainer. But when you try to make a battery that won't blow up, there are some details to take care of.
Sure. Another thing you talked about actually at the Southampton Progressive Caucus was desalination in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see anything that we could bring here to Long Island regarding?
There's a tendency to wait until we need these things, but to prepare for this crowded world and the population and the resources that we take, we have to be prepared in advance. So to be able to look at Israel and say they're leading the world in desalination technology. Long Island may not be envious of that now, but 30 years from now, it is difficult to keep our aquifers clean. We know this. We know we cycle hundreds of millions of gallons of groundwater every day from our aquifers and try to take some of the nitrates out of it before the water goes either back in or into our bays. So if it's in our children's future, we should be keeping up on that technology, even if we're not demanding that it be installed today.
Sorry, I'm just freezing. I'm so cold. So I loved your #2 issue on your website, which was growing trade schools. I think that that's super smart, especially considering the constituency and the economic opportunity out here on Long Island. What would a trade school plan that reaches into our public high school program look like? And can you speak to what you think something like this could do for our economy?
I will. The issue of trade schools is really dear to my heart because I grew up in Pittsburgh and it's the steel city. A lot of us had great-grandparents who were in the steel mills. It's a very practical, hard-working place. It's a lot like Long Island. Long Island has that hustle to it as well. And when I was a teenager, I had friends around the corner from me who had the same English classes and social studies classes that I had in the morning, and they got on the bus, and in the afternoon they went to Beatty Tech, and they did their auto mechanics, and another one did technical chemistry program, and I was envious of them. It seemed to me like, oh, I have all this homework, and they're doing something different. They're working with their hands. They're this much closer to working than I am. So BOCES is that program on Long Island, as are various other schools here, and a lot of these campuses do what we need them to do. The BOCES is on the high school campus, where it should be. When I spoke to voters about this, I heard more than once that there's a perception of a two-class system here that just has to change. We can't move forward if we are dividing people up into, you have a college degree and you did this, and therefore you're different. Parents told me, I asked my teenager to look at BOCES and they shied away from it because of a social perception. And I spoke to one woman who said she was a librarian, but she also was a painter. So she worked for a while as a contract painter and people thought of her as a contractor. When she was a librarian, people who met her that way thought she was a professional. And the way people treated her, she felt the difference clearly as night and day. And we just cannot have that. I discussed this at a forum last night at the peer NIPAN group, and somebody said, but why should low-income people go to one school and others go to another? And I kind of said, wow, did we mishear each other?
Yeah.
Because I never actually said that, right? It's what you want to do with your hands all day. We want our students to have a strong public education, and then whatever they gravitate toward will be their job. So that's what I want to see for the future, is that we are preparing these new trades for this clean energy sector. It could be everything. There will be polymer chemistry for the insulation of the cables that go in the ocean. There will be the materials of the turbines. There will be making the tooling and repairing and maintaining the machines that install the platforms. There's everything.
So
It's just
exciting.
the world's our oyster here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's nice to hear you talk about it. While we're talking about schools, the Republicans passed a tax plan that we know is going to be a disaster for homeowners on Long Island, but it's also going to be a disaster for schools since our school budgets are linked to property taxes. If you're elected in November, how would you mitigate this problem, not only for homeowners, but also for schools that are going to be underfunded?
Well, we have to overturn what they did to the SALT deductions. There's no question about that. It's regressive, and it taxes people twice. I will push with the rest of the progressive delegation in every way possible for a progressive and not regressive tax structure. That's the only way to address wealth inequality properly. And to do that, we have to reduce the influence of lobbyists. We know that bank lobbyists write laws. We know how this works in Washington. If you look at what Elizabeth Warren had to go through to get new levels of consumer protection, I read some of her writings. I know what she heard from people who had been foreclosed on. One thing went wrong in their life, and their homes were foreclosed on. I've done house hunting on Long Island too, and every time I walked into a flip, I just felt sad, like this is a foreclosure. There's a broken family behind this. I don't want to see that.
How do you reduce the influence of lobbyists?
You have to pass laws that reduce their influence. You have to. That's the be-all and the end-all. You have to change campaign financing.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that may be controversial is the idea of term limits. I'm not in favor of term limits for Congress people, because when you do that, you have turnover and inexperience in Congress, but the lobbyists have no term limits. The lobbyists have 10 and 20 years of experience in influencing the members of Congress, and it would actually weaken us in that sense. Then again, I know that the desire is not to have Congress people who are elected because of funding from all those lobbyists. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. We just have to know exactly what we're getting when we change those laws. It's going to be interesting debates.
Yeah, absolutely. Another issue that has really affected Long Island is the opioid epidemic. Your website offers great insight into addiction treatments that could be seen as controversial, like medical cannabis and needle exchanges. I'm assuming you've done research. And I'm wondering, what have you found, and how has it shaped your ideas about addiction? And obviously, how is that going to shape your platform for dealing with this issue?
I spent Thanksgiving dinner this year with a family who was spending their first Thanksgiving without their son, because they had found him just a couple months before with needles. So just in the wake of that news, I was meeting other people on Long Island. I really want to tell you what 2 voters I spoke to had to say. One woman, when she found out that I was a scientist, she said, "Oh, my son is a chemist." She's feeling safer to say things. "Oh, my son is a chemist. What do you think about medical cannabis?" And I told her that to have an ideologically driven law, like laws against medical cannabis, is only harmful. It harms us. So then she felt safer again yet, and she told me about her chronic pain, and she told me about she had been able, because of her son, to be part of a cannabis trial, but she couldn't afford it. It was like $100 for a little vial that lasted a week. She couldn't keep it up, but it was allowing her to function. She said, she just wanted to be able to get out of bed every day. I spoke to another voter who said, "I have a situation with chronic pain, and on the worst days, opioids are the only thing that I can use, and I do not want to be shamed for it." It's so important that we hear people who are saying that. One treatment is not another person's treatment. That's why it's so important to allow doctors to be doctors and not to be handlers and promoters for pharmaceutical companies. One of the people advising me on the opioids issue is a dear old friend of mine who is a medical researcher and an infectious diseases doctor. And he's been to thousands of medical conferences, and he knows the marketing and lobbying that is done from medical students on up by these drug companies to push a particular treatment. And we know that they have artificially raised prices on things, profit-driven style, when it looked like a lot of people needed them, and naloxone was one of them, an antidote to an overdose. So the power of the drug lobbies has to be stopped. The conservatives who are trying to morally dictate that you shall not have a needle-sharing program or you shall not have medical cannabis, we have to vote them out of office.
The pharmaceutical companies, what would you view as one of maybe many solutions to that? Regulation?
Regulation, a healthcare system that allows prices to be negotiated, a single-payer healthcare system so that there aren't 10 different people to negotiate for prices with, that allows all these other variables to come into play. You need many sources of influence to tackle a really big problem, so I think you don't say which of these angles, but you just figure out how to use them all.
Seems to be a common thread.
It is a common thread. It's a problem-solving thread. You're not trying to win an election when you're trying to solve a problem. You're actually trying to solve the problem, and
right.
You're not trying to be the one whose idea got picked.
Right.
You're actually just trying to solve the problem. It's just like that has become an applause line for my campaign now, to talk about truth with facts. People go, yeah, that's not where we wanted to be in this century. But we find ourselves there.
Getting cheering for facts, though, must be satisfying.
It is, of course, it's very satisfying, and if they write checks, it's even better.
Yeah. So let me ask you, are you a feminist?
I'm a feminist.
You are?
Yes. Are you a feminist? I'm so happy to meet you.
We're the only ones.
We're the only ones in the room, clearly.
Anybody else want to come out tonight? As a feminist, if elected to Congress, would you be an ally to the women's movement by being a vocal opponent of this president?
I have nothing nice to say about this president. But here's what it requires as a feminist and as somebody who cares about people not getting hurt. It's not enough to say that you will passively vote to retain the Roe versus Wade ruling or that you're pro-choice. We have to know the fronts on which enemies are marching towards women's economic equality and reproductive equality and health and safety. If you start to do research in this area, you learn about ideological hospitals with this kind of I want to say they have a religious face on them. The name of the movement may look that way, but they monopolize small towns. They become the only hospital. It becomes a situation where low-income patients on Medicaid can't get a tubal ligation because the hospital says they won't do it, or they can't get certain pregnancy emergency treatments because the hospital considers it to be in the category of abortion. There's a movement there to define a legal personhood in such a way that every kind of birth control that influences a fertilized zygote would become illegal, and we would be back 70 years. And so we need a candidate to be knowledgeable about Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood Hudson-Peconic runs 3 centers in our district. They're in Riverhead and Patchogue and Smithtown. Nationwide, we can say that 75% of the Planned Parenthood patients who receive services are at 150% of the income level or below. We know this. And the numbers they have in their fact sheet are that their contraceptive services are estimated to have prevented over 600,000 unwanted pregnancies and almost 200,000 abortions. And so we know that we will knock on doors with people who are pro-life and want to close the door again when they find out you're a Democrat. Occasionally it is possible to have a conversation and say, I care about infant mortality, that's why I care about health care. Occasionally it's possible to say, I don't believe the government should tell a couple how to interpret scripture. I don't think the government should tell a couple how to plan their family. Occasionally it'll be possible to frame a conversation that way. Occasionally we'll have to walk away from the door. But we gotta have eyes open on what laws have been passed all around the country in these different states.
Well, I think related to, you're really the only candidate in this race who I've heard connect the dots between reproductive freedom to what you call on your website family freedom and the economy. Keeping women out of positions of power, in my opinion, is really the motive behind pro-life advocates in most cases. Can you tell us more about your pro-life, pro-choice, stance, family freedom, and how that specifically is an economic issue?
I will. If you look at, I'll just use New York State as a model. There has been a 10-point plan for women's equality in New York State, a lot of which has been passed into law, and it includes things like ending pregnancy discrimination, reducing the wage gap, paid maternity leave ideas. It includes making sure that legal fees can be recovered. So there were circumstances in New York where you could prosecute somebody who assaulted you, but you couldn't actually collect your legal fees so that it was out of your pocket to bring a suit.
Right.
So we know what happens then. People don't get any closure or any justice when they're harmed. So all those facets, and then you just look at the data at how many of the anti-abortion laws predominantly affect people with low wages, people of color, people who already have obstacles to having economic equality, and realizing that it keeps people out of their jobs to allow these different kind of discriminations and obstacles.
Before we move on, I want to talk about racial equality, so that's perfect. There's no denying that Long Island is segregated. There are systems of oppression, intended or otherwise, that segregate our communities and therefore our school districts, and creates cyclical inequities and economic opportunity that perpetuate the segregation. And it has to stop. So you suggest it starts with laws.
I do.
Right.
And I think everyone in the room is going to agree with the basics that we have to try to reduce and eventually eliminate this kind of discrimination and racism. But I want people to understand how deeply I believe that institutional forces that create discrimination cause personal prejudice to arise, even more so than the other way around. If there are laws saying that the person who does crack cocaine instead of powder cocaine is worse because the penalty is much, much worse, we will believe that those people are bad people. It influences us to a great degree. We have to strike laws from the books that were implemented to perpetuate racism and discrimination. We have to oppose for-profit prisons. We have to oppose for-profit immigrant detention centers. We have to oppose voter suppression laws. We have to oppose those laws along with, we have to strengthen discrimination laws, anti-discrimination laws.
And those are great examples. I also wonder how, if elected, you'll work with communities of color to really have them be not just with you, but leading that charge. I think is really important.
Thanks for that question. Even as a campaigner, it's important for me not to speak for any one of another underrepresented community. So I'm proud to be able to say that our campaign has added 2 community coordinators specifically for Latino outreach. Angel is a DACA recipient who is from Peru, and Lisa is a Long Islander with Puerto Rican heritage, and they both have agreed to work as volunteers on my campaign in the community coordinator role and do the work, with me and for me to help reach out and make it clear that we will be able to hear what people are saying. And I hope as the campaign continues to grow, we're going to add community coordinators for the African American community, for women's issues, and for other groups that we see the need arise. And so that's an example of how I intend to work on this. It's teamwork, and you'll see that out of me in office too, that it really takes a village to do that.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a question relevant to this week. Democrats struck a deal with Republicans that didn't include protections for Dreamers. Where would you have stood on the issue, and did you support Democrats wanting to hold a hard line against Republicans?
I answered that question very slowly on video at yesterday's forum. I'll come to it a little quicker today. I likely would have voted with the Senate Democrats to reopen the government. I wouldn't have happily voted that way. There is a certain way that we have to handle the strategy of how to vote when we don't hold majorities in the houses, and a lot of the important things in that hostage situation, the children on ship, and just all the other people who would be affected by a government shutdown, that's where the waters parted. So I want to tell the Dreamers, and I spoke to my campaign's Dreamer about this on the phone today, and he actually agrees with that landscape. Don't lose hope, because there was a lot of work done in the Senate to try to come to speaking terms. I know I was reading that Senator Collins and Senator Manchin brokered a lot of discussion, as well as whatever Senator Schumer did. And the whole party knows how angry and upset their electorate is. I have no doubt that they will triple their efforts to get the right answer with a Clean Dream Act in February. The Dream Act was put into words this year. It's the Dream Act of 2017. It does pretty much the same things that the executive order did. It belongs in our books, because what we want is that everyone is documented. We want everyone to be here on a visa or as a citizen or whatever process in their paperwork they are. That's how our social safety net works. That's how we know, that's how our census stays true. That's how we develop the numbers for the next year's wave of immigration, is by knowing who we have and by reckoning their wages correctly. We need to work with the employers here in the farm community for their temporary workers to make sure that they have an efficient system to get the labor they need. We want everyone to be documented.
I have 2 more questions for you. One of the things we're hearing a lot of is that women should run for office. What was the impetus for you to run, and are you finding support from other female candidates or organizations like Emily's List?
I'm happy to say that we were just endorsed by the American Women's Party. That was a discussion that we had, and we rolled out our press release this week because Monday was the 45th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And so Emily's List also was one of the first organizations I spoke to, and as I alluded to earlier, they are a very large PAC, and so they will spend their money back in people who are already at a high level of viability. They are not going to chime in before a primary in most cases, but they are absolutely committed to making sure that strong pro-choice women run for office. There are a lot of other organizations too. There's She Should Run, and there's Eleanor's Legacy in New York, which is for state level and local level. And there are many organizations encouraging progressive candidates to run as well. I think one thing that you learn is when you enter any new arena, you learn the difference between how much the cheerleading is going to help you versus how much real support is there. And so a lot of the social media flurry looks good and is exciting, but if you try and get further into it, you find that the cheerleading is there, but you're not exactly sure what this organization actually does to help candidates. 314 Action is a small group, and it can afford to put money into some of the scientist races, and when you get the 314 Action fundraising letters, the donation to them will help. It could help a graduate student run for school board, which is amazing because all over the country, anti-fact books about evolution and geography are being mailed to schools, and you want a scientist on the school board to say, not that one. Not that, that's not a book.
You seem to be really liking this. I mean, as a political newcomer, again, I mean, and going from a scientific world to a political world, it doesn't, at least to me, seem like that easy of a transition. How are you finding this whole experience, and how are you reconciling your idealism with the political reality of running for office? It's really the question.
There's nothing easy about this, that's for sure. And it is a big change. When I first embarked on it, I asked some key people, some experienced politicians, what did you love about running for office? And what they explained was what I've learned too. It is fabulous and amazing to go through a district where you thought you already knew kind of how it ticked and meet all these new people and hear what they have to say. It's a real privilege to run for office. And that's the best reason not to sling any mud, because the main reason not to sling mud is not because of the other candidates or the outcome of the race. It's because you're missing out on the best part of campaigning, which is to find out what everybody thinks and how hard everybody is trying to do the right thing. So that's it in a nutshell. That's it, meeting everybody here.
Well, let's give you another opportunity to do that. Let's turn the questions over to the audience. We'll start with Bernie.
So I'd be curious as to your thoughts about healthcare. Obviously, the Obamacare issue has been on the table for the year that Trump has been in office. Bernie Sanders had come out with a proposal for single payer. There have been proposals to reduce the Medicare eligible age. I'm just kind of curious as to how you see kind of that entire issue.
Thank you. I do support HR 676, which is the House version of Medicare for All. One of the things I like so much about that bill is that it has been in existence in some form since 2002 or 2003. You know, the name has been changing and it's been evolving, but people have been working on it for a decade. You know, that's real work about considering different ways to pay for it. Some of the candidates I'm running against will say that other ways to prop up the ACA need to be looked at. The ACA was looked at over a lot of years of hearings and expert testimony and negotiations. One thing we learned about the ACA was that it was possible to destabilize it. And because the reason it was possible to destabilize is because of the way it needed to support the insurance agencies, the insurance companies at the beginning of the run. And so Senator Rubio and a couple other Republicans in the Senate were able to take large chunks of that base out of the budget for the ACA and basically guarantee that it would be destabilized before its time and basically ensure that markets in some states would fall apart. So I believe that voters can be shown the merits of a single payer system if we show them how much money is spent in negotiations between insurance companies and in trying to figure out how to do your insurance companies. I spoke to two families, I spoke to a nurse whose job was to be in-home taking care of patients. She said that after her shift, she was 2 more hours on her dining room table, unpaid, to do all the paperwork to prove to the insurance company that she had done the work that she was authorized to do. And I spoke to another family who had a handicapped child at home. They said that their nurse spent 2 hours of their shift in their house on that dining room table doing the paperwork instead of watching their child. Neither of those scenarios is all right. So I think if we help people understand, and I know how the Republicans will frame this. I know how Lee Zeldin will frame it. I know how the Republican state legislators and senators frame this. They say, you'll be prevented from choosing your insurance company. Let's not be distracted. People don't want to choose their insurance company. They want to choose their doctor. The only reason we try to figure out which insurance company we want is because we're trying to get our doctor and our eye doctor and our dentist all on one plan. We don't want to be spending this much of our economy doing paperwork for the insurance industry.
Wendy.
Thank you. This is the first time I've seen you. It's very interesting. With BOCES, it's not just a class issue or whatever. As a person who was on a school board for years, first the recession and then the 2% tax cap, we had to limit the kids who could go to BOCES because of the finances involved with BOCES. And does a great job, but it is expensive, and we couldn't educate kids in the school and send as many to BOCES. So how do you see that on the federal level being something that you would be involved with?
Well, that's a big problem if people can't afford that secondary education. So I won't accept any plan for free college tuition unless it's also a plan for tuition for trade schools. That's one thing I'll insist on. And I also will want to know for certain how much facts are known about the programs that will lead to the most success, whether it is to give people the first year of tuition free or at a zero interest loan or wherever, and then to have the rest of it be contingent on performance, or whether to expect them to pay or take out a loan for their first year of school after high school and then qualify for relief after that. There could be different scenarios, but I will insist that if public colleges get this, then the trade schools have to get it too. And I'd welcome you, I'd appreciate if you wanted to reach out with me also offline and we could talk further. I'd love to know more. There's also, I think, a pipeline problem in the trades, which I've heard is that people want to enter and can't. We need to sort that out. I need to find out from the different trade organizations what's stopping people moving forward and unstop those pipes.
Ron?
I'm curious, Senator Dodd told me when he was asked by somebody new to government for advice and counsel, he would always tell them, why are you asking me? Walk across the aisle and ask them for advice and counsel, because that's who you're going to be working with. Should you get elected, are you prepared to walk across the aisle and ask for advice and counsel?
I'm already like watching C-SPAN and making a list of people who I want to ask for advice who are across the aisle. There is confusion anytime there's a problem that's complex. If intelligent people who want a good outcome don't agree, we probably need more data. That's how I do the job I used to do, and that's how I'll do the job that I'm going to be doing. Where I'm going to be in committee, there are going to be times when the Republicans have the facts right. My job will be to explain why I think so that everybody in that room understands a little bit more about the ideas, and we get there. I don't feel, that's why I don't campaign on indignation over all the horrible people who voted such and such a way. That's why I want to represent the whole district.
Anybody else? I think, yes, this one right here.
I've heard the fact that when I call myself a feminist, that right away it seems like I'm not pro-life. There's something very wrong that somehow we've got women to be a feminist. It no longer becomes a reproductive justice concern or a choice, but either you're pro-abortion or you're against life. Somehow, the wording has to change. I think women have been pushed into corners, and it's been against our own interests. It's really more a family concern. Working with your doctor, it's more, like I said, reproductive justice. How are you working on that issue? Mainly just to change the dynamics of the language of it.
We can just riff a little bit on the difference between being cooperative and being combative, I guess. There was a case study I read about that was it was published by the consultants who were kind of advertising their way of handling negotiations. There was a Planned Parenthood and a Right to Life group in a local area butting heads and somebody had tried to get them to sit around a table to talk to each other about how to handle or not handle altercations in front of a women's health center, something like that. And people couldn't get them to talk to each other until somebody just sort of cleared the air, made it safe to speak, and said, do we all want to reduce teen pregnancies? yes, everyone in the room wanted to reduce teen pregnancies. So if you can say, all right, let's only talk about things that we know reduce teen pregnancies and have that conversation, that's a path. There are times when you will have to acknowledge that a lot of money is invested in keeping people fighting. It keeps power in power to keep people fighting. I had another thought about that I kind of lost track of. If I remember it, I'll let you know.
Well, you mentioned framework before, and it's not doing the framing of where you think that does divide and cause inability for people to talk to each other and solve problems. And it's kind of made, feminist means something. I know it's great to be a feminist. And sometimes it's, to be a Democrat means things that I think the umbrella should be bigger, or the tent bigger, whatever the term means to do that. I was at the rally the other day in Port Jefferson, and there was a woman that's really alone with a sign that said peace on one side, and the other side it said all life matters. And people stood away from her. I could think, what's going on here? What is the dynamic of this? Of course all life matters.
So I do want people to know that I've heard that more than once from people who are personally anti-abortion and consider themselves Democrats feel very alone, and they feel like they want to hide that fact. They feel like they have no political home on that issue. My approach will just be to try to open eyes to what it really means to draw that white line that says you cannot have this medical procedure because I've defined it as life. That causes women to possibly die from complications with their pregnancies, and it would, if taken to a logical conclusion, prevent birth control from being a legal treatment to have. And one thing you could say to be gently combative, this is the thought I was trying to remember, is look, if you are in a place of indecision, deep moral indecision, where the stakes feel morally very high to you, you want to do right, and it's a big choice you're about to make, you don't call your legislator up and ask them what to do. You are working with your partner, you may have your family, you may have trusted friends, and you're speaking with your doctor. If you're not calling your legislator, how dare you make me call mine, right? How dare you make my legislator able to tell me what I'm doing? There's often a personal story behind the most outspoken anti-abortion people. I can name somebody I know who had to she felt at a watershed. She married early, raised her 3 kids for a lot of their years by themselves, worked very hard, and when her daughter was pregnant at, 16 or 17, I think it was a watershed for her that she had to decide how she would feel about what she did with her daughter, what her daughter wanted to do. And whatever her daughter chose to do, she felt the need to justify it in a way that we find inappropriate because it's a blanket treatment for everybody. There is a personal story behind some of what was said. There are abortion survivors who were brought out of the womb and harmed by salt water and rescued, and grew up with palsy and handicaps, and they are outspoken anti-abortion activists. And some of these, one woman I'm thinking of in particular, I don't remember her name, she's very intelligent and interesting, and she's very glad that somebody pulled her body out of that situation. Nobody wants scenarios like that. The right will try to capitalize on those horror stories, and they will muddy the waters for all the other medical procedures, which we don't even want to feel shame about them. We want to just take it as, look, we have to make a lot of decisions with our bodies. Everything, especially that a woman does, is going to be questioned. Should we really have done that, or should we be doing something else? We live it every minute, no matter what choices we made.
What was your name? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I just want to say I appreciate your question, and I had a very similar experience at the Women's March in DC where a woman had an anti-abortion sign, but she wanted to be part of the march, and she was very alienated from the crowd. And I had that same thought as you, so I just appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, I don't know, it's got to be, such a legislative thing, and we got so divided, and it's so black and white.
There should be a place for all women in the feminist movement, in my opinion.
Some discussion, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Patty?
Thank you for coming, Elaine. We appreciate you coming. So, looking forward, you get the nomination, you take Zeldin out, and you get to Congress. What would be the first thing that you would really want to make your imprint on there?
The first thing I want to do is to energize Long Island's economy, and I believe that clean energy production is the way to do it. I want voters to see a difference in their money in pocket right away. And I have no doubt that there will be many battles regarding feminism and racism for me to fight as well. I have no doubt that I will do everything the delegation needs me to do regarding health care so that we don't have people falling through those cracks. I will do everything the delegation needs me to do to chime in on how to reduce wealth inequality, but instead of talking about wealth inequality, I want to give people jobs here with something that is going to save the planet. And we are a dense population at sea level on these fragile shores. If we figure out how to do Long Island, the whole world can benefit from this. I'm running on that premise.
Nancy?
So, back when Tim Bishop was running against Lee Zeldin, there was a lot of money, as there will be this time. And there was a lot of misinformation and lies. And it basically took him down, took Tim Bishop out of the running. Is there anything that you can think of that they would take and skew to hurt your candidacy?
The job of every candidate is to find the right time to tell their consultants, their marketing director, their spin person, to tell them, here's some things I can think of that could be twisted. And when basically what you do is you have a response prepared very quickly, and you never look off balance. You never look like, oh, they got me, or oh, I'm done. You say, isn't that interesting? Well, let me travel back in time with me to 1996 when here was my situation, and this is what I did. I'm a lot like you. So it's part of the campaign team plan. But this is really one of the things I like about my candidacy. Lee Zeldin does not want me to run. He can smear everybody else with no cost to him whatsoever. It does not matter what he says about these people who are this far from retirement. It does not matter what he says about people who are going to disappear back into anonymity afterwards. Everything he says about me has 3,000 people at Brookhaven National Laboratory who know it's not true and who know that I'm not like that. And he doesn't want bad blood with the lab. As soon as I entered this, as soon as I was in magazines even thinking about this, I saw the traces, the footprints of America Rising tracking me to try and crack things. They did FOIA things, and there was attempted email hacks that didn't succeed. Back in March, before any of you had ever heard of me, right? And also, Lee Zeldin began to promote all the great, wonderful sciencey things that he did. He started doing press releases that took credit for grants that Stony Brook professors had worked their butts off to get. The Stony Brook professor gets a big grant, like millions of dollars, and Lee Zeldin's talking about money he brought into the district that he had nothing to do with. But you could see him already moving over to catch that football. He doesn't want me in the race, which is why we do want me in the race.
So no illegal real estate.
I could only be so lucky as to have that kind of money to throw around and do illegal things with.
Are you a Steelers fan?
Oh my gosh, a Steelers fan. I better have a mitigation for that one. There's a Steelers license plate on the back of my truck.
It's scandalous.
What do you think about Apple and Disney taking the money they're going to save from the corporate tax rate, dropping to 21% and giving it to their hiring and giving it to their employees as bonuses?
I think it's a public relations stunt, right? I think the same thing about most.
Apple and Disney, particularly Apple, it's a very CSR-driven company. I think it's sincere. I think that it's a very good possibility that that one aspect of the tax plan could actually improve the economy on Long Island, which is lowering the tax rate. And we had the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Bringing it down to where it is, and then having companies, if they're willing, to put it back into their plants and into their employees, could help the economy, if they do it.
I'm just gonna add a thought to that. I want to see companies giving their employees training and longevity. I mean, I want them to let people have careers again. The gig economy is gonna strangle the next generation. A bonus is a transient flash in the pan. That's may have been why I had an impulse to call it a publicity stunt. If they are going to give a bonus, if it's really gonna promote new corporate offices, that would be great. But I want to see companies who are going to take their employees out of school and bring them in and teach them what they need to know and keep them with real retirement plans and a real sense of security in their work so that the employees are invested in that company and care about it. Apple's probably an example of a company where once people are in, they do feel very well taken care of. So in that sense, it's not so easy to be combative against Apple, but there are plenty of companies who are just happy to outsource everything. And if they outsource everything, but they've sprinkled some bonuses around, I might still stay skeptical. I think the thing that makes the profound change to stability and security for us is if companies give employees a sense that there's longevity in their tenure with that company. That's what I think is important, and I'd like to see more discussion of it, I think.
Also Disney, my husband worked for Disney for 15 years, so they always were big on giving bonuses. I'm curious to read more about what is different now than what they have done in
You
the past.
also know that Apple is committed to build another one of their
Yeah, I read that too.
corporate customer services plants, where they're gonna hire 22,000 additional people. So it has to be looked at. The only thing I would say, it would have been good perhaps if there was a bipartisan agreement, which is what we're hoping for going forward. I'd like to see the government working more closely together. They could have done two things. They could have raised taxes on the top 1%, at the same time lowering the corporate tax
Yes.
rate. That would have been the middle ground. Are you for the middle ground?
The middle ground is much better than what we have right now. Yes. We have to make things better.
I remember in the 80s bonuses being given out, and then wages became stagnant, and wealth inequality just widened and widened. So I'm very skeptical of it. I think it is something that could work, but I'll believe it when I see it. And I just remember the bonuses and everything after Reaganomics and what happened there. So I remain skeptical on that.
Well, we're just gonna take this gentleman, Wendy, because we
Sure.
have one, and then we'll go to you.
So, I mean, having come from the lab, you know that the, I guess, morale of public employees is not as high as it used to be. So I'd like to hear two things. One, what thoughts you have on how to rebuild our institutions. And by that I mean the sort of desire of people to work for our government, for example, in the State Department, in the energy sector, anywhere for our government. And second, how we rebuild our international relations, which, I mean, we're also critical to your work and my work at the lab.
So thanks for that. With this much chaos in the executive branch, that is the reason I'm focusing on Congress. Congress is something that we can change sooner than we can change other things. Passing laws can be very cumbersome and be a lengthy process. If we protect our agencies, if we at least round up Congress to agree to protect our agencies, agencies can respond faster. So the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, to make sure that we show some strength, that the agencies have the wherewithal to be able to rebuild their rules that make things better, that will make them want to work there. I mean, there's a certain amount of things that we can't do while the executive branch is in chaos and in charge of the State Department and doing these things. But I think we can look at our agencies and we can try to put people in Congress who will look at facts. It doesn't mean they all have to be Democrats, but we have to take the people who will carry a snowball into the chambers and make an argument with it and make sure that those people are not in office anymore. A friend of mine really felt emotional about this. He said, oh my gosh, Elaine, what's gonna happen? The blue team has a wave and then we win for a while and then the red people get angry and then it goes back and forth forever. I said, no, you know what? Just find the people who are really extreme and really closing their eyes to reality. Vote them out of office. That's the priority. Zeldin is one of them. He is so intent on dividing us. He's divided himself into two flavors. He's got his Twitter flavor, which is really rabble-rousing, and then he's got an incredibly serene, slick things he puts in his congressional emails that are like, oh, I'm so bipartisan and so on. He's a bad actor. That's a fact.
Wendy? Back to the taxes, with the middle ground aspect. Was it middle ground to make the corporate cuts permanent and the middle and lower class temporary? So that the corporate will stay good forever and we'll be fighting each other like dogs for, the crumbs on the table. So what about that aspect? And I have another question, but what about that aspect of the tax bill?
That tells you right there that the bills are being written by lobbyists and not for and of the people. That's what makes it not a middle ground.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. And also, before you were talking about for-profit prisons and everything, and like reinvigorating public service, we've privatized so many things. And where you said before about getting the facts to drive, and the facts are that privatizing does not save money. It actually costs more, and yet we're constantly sold this bill of goods that if we privatize this governmental function and that one, that will save money. And it's a fallacy that somehow seems to be perpetuated and voted on as though it's the truth.
I'm just going to ask you for optimism. I think the millennial generation gets it about the more socialist aspects of democracy that we see elsewhere in Europe and so on. Social change is, you could argue, it's almost impossible to see until it has occurred. When only 15% of Americans believed that black and white people should be allowed to marry each other, that was the reality until suddenly 85% of Americans believed that. It was not possible before that change. There was not a slow climb. There was this happened. Suddenly everybody, because of the movements, because of the activists, because of all the blood, sweat, and tears in the streets, it didn't seem like it was working, and then it was changed. Was racism cured? No, but 85% of people now would say, of course, interracial marriage is not a thing we legislate or even judge on. Same with marriage equality for LGBTQ. There was a time when only 20% of people thought that was reasonable. There was not a slow ramp to this 80% consensus that we have now. There was a big step. It was costly in terms of activism, but when it happened, that can't go backwards. And I think our ideas about what's an appropriate structure of wealth in the country and structure of laws, I think we have to keep that in mind, that it is in part a social movement, that we cannot see it happening until, in some sense, we get there.
We'll go in the back. I haven't heard from you.
Yes. You said that you were endorsed by American Women's Party and one other group, but I didn't entirely hear the name and I don't know who they are.
The group is called Demand Universal Health Care. And the founder, Sue Saltmarsh, is really interesting. I wound up looking it up when I got the message from them. She, if I recall this correctly, so pardon me if I don't, she worked with HIV positive patients and organizations and struggled to help them some decades ago. And then after a while, she found out that she herself had a chronic illness that was very serious. And it was a so-called orphan illness, very rare, that so few people have it, that there's basically no motivation for the drug companies to make their treatments reasonably priced. And I guess the press release I read said that she had been given 10 years to live. And that was about 10 years prior to the interview, and she was saying, well, I think I still have a few more. And that interview was a few years ago. So that path between trying to help other people, she found out that being on Medicare or being on Medicaid was almost as much of a stigma as being HIV positive. in the time and place where she was working. And the way people were treated just opened her eyes to the way we don't give people health care and how much that needs to change. So I look forward to hearing more from that organization and going forward and, their alliances.
Did you have a question?
Elaine, you've clearly done a lot of research, which is wonderful. Your opponent is going to try to discredit you in some way. So what do you think the obvious, more common ways will attempt to discredit you, and what will your defense be?
I think that Lee Zeldin will try to make me look like an alien creature, like somebody who doesn't relate to anyone else here. And so I will have to really work to show the connections I have to the district, the buy-in from all the groups, and basically to keep the supporters who want to vote for the Democrat, to keep them excited and engaged and knocking on the doors. Voter turnout is so low in this county, 23%. There are so many registered Democrats that we can pull out onto this, out of their door on polling day. We can do it. So I want to, again, just express the optimism that I have for what we can do here for the future of the district, and say that we'll have to keep that up, because again, sometimes if you go right against what somebody is saying about you, you're negating their frame, you're keeping their argument alive. You're different, no, I'm the same. You're different, no, I'm the same. Look where we're going. Look where we're going, and look who we've got with us. Look how this campaign is growing. Look how this movement needs to focus on what we can do for the future.
I think there are thousands of people under the age of 38 that are totally apolitical, don't feel there's any place for them in the political system, don't feel represented, don't feel like even their vote makes a difference. I think you need a catchphrase, or someone who's going to beat Zeldin needs to catch something to get these young people out. Because I think there's thousands of them who just don't vote and don't care and don't even know who's running.
I agree with you about that group of voters. I think that catchphrase to me is a little bit of a magic bullet approach. And I know why people think that's important, but I think sometimes we see the catchphrase of somebody really important and interesting like Sanders or Obama, and we think that that was kind of the thing they did. But what they really did was all the legwork of the sales. You got to touch people many times for any kind of sale. Fundraising, cold calls, there were many people, I left 4 messages on their phones, not knowing if they cared a bit to hear from me. And the 5th time they answered, it was a $300 check. And likewise, keeping volunteers engaged. Sometimes asking for their phone number on the first date is too much, but they'll give you the email address. And then they'll show up at 2 of the house parties, and then you have their phone number. And it's the same with these voters. Sometimes the first step is to say, here's the voter registration form. I hope you're interested in filling one out. I'll mail it in for you. And to put them on the list and come back in 2 months and say, whatever the next step is, a petition signature or information or a question about their idea on an issue. So the more people we have, and also, I know that we're all out of our comfort zone. I mean, this is an activist group, so you're not, but speaking to sort of the camera there, people are out of their comfort zone in talking to strangers and bugging them in their free time with politics. If the ask is small, every salesperson knows you can touch someone lightly. They're not going to be too offended. Every con person knows that you ask for a light first before you try and ask for the thing that gets their wallet out of their pocket.
Nancy.
Yeah, I have another question. So we haven't talked anything today about foreign policy. Do you have anything that you want to bring to us today, how you feel? I know that at the last panel discussion, I was a little bit surprised that one of the panelists said that he felt that the embassy should be moved to Jerusalem, but not now. Maybe that's your opening for foreign policy. How do you feel about that?
Jerusalem is a holy city to more than one group of people who live there, and it is up to them to figure out how to share their holy lands and the political layer over that, the political importance of that. If there is a change in the boundaries or a unification or a takeover or something that is driven by the people who live there, then it makes sense to talk about whether our embassy is in the right place. Why in the world would we pick up a piece on that other chessboard and cause chaos, and then put our embassy right in the middle of the chaos? You know, Congress, the House of Representatives exists at the pleasure of the president to advise on foreign policy, and I think the concept of advising this White House on foreign policy leaves us at a loss as to how credible it would be to say that we can make the world a better place. We have to promote diplomacy, and that doesn't sound like good diplomacy to me.
Anybody else before I ask my last question, which is, should you win the primary, how would you leverage groups like ours to help you in the general?
How would I leverage groups like yours? Well, it will take everybody in the district to bring that message out, that there's something worth walking out the door and voting for. It doesn't matter how much money the other side has if they can't buy votes with them. And we can get people to vote by the sheer enthusiasm that we have. I was at a house party and a lady said, well, that's nice, Elaine, that you have policies and so on, but you know, I don't really open any emails or answer any phone messages if it's not from my friends, so how do you reach people like me? And I said, what an interesting question. Why are you here today? The answer is because Judy invited her and she loves Judy. That's the answer. And Liz at another party said, what issues are you strong on that I can ask my friends what their concerns are politically, and I'll tell them that you'll make everything better because you're so strong on those issues. And I said, I wish it worked that way, but they will come to the next thing with you because they love you. You know, there are people in my volunteer group who were Republicans 10 years ago and decided they didn't believe in supply-side economics anymore, and they weren't social conservatives anyway, so they said, well, there's nothing left for me here. And there are people on my volunteer group who I'm not certain, but they may have voted for Trump last year because they seemed like the type of person who would be up for a change, but they came to hear me and liked what I had to say and clearly do not like what's happening. I also have people in the volunteer group who say, you know, my spouse is really apolitical, but I'm glad I brought them to the party because they enjoyed themselves and they liked what you were saying. So we can just continue to get the message out, bring our enthusiasm, and give people interesting things to do, whether it's register, vote, or help do actual campaigning work and research. The research work so that your candidates get their talking points right. Look, I really trust all of you to know what to do for this primary. I don't think you'll listen to any candidate who tells you to be afraid of what will happen if you vote for the wrong person in the primary. I think you will be able to do what you need to do. I think fearlessness looks good on us.
It's a good place to end. Elaine, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
for-
much. So thanks again so much. There is literature on the table. The business cards there have my own personal contact information. I'd be very happy to have you folks reach out to me in any way, shape, or form through the next months. But sooner's better because we've got ballot petitions in a few weeks. Thanks so much. It is an honor to be researched into at that level of depth.
Oh, yes.
I'm
That's a nice
so
compliment.
flattered because you spent more than a minute on this.
I also like the experience of that because it gives
You're doing a research. I had a chance to take a tilt at some of the things and I decided not to do it because it was actually more important to use this forum to let people get to know me.
I think so. And I want to say too that, you know, I've been all over these campaign websites.
Thanks so much.
Maybe we can get a picture with you.
Of course.
Can we get together, Kyle, so we can take a picture?
I need to get on it.